Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Hi, Gunn. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate seeing you here. And for the last several episodes, we've been going through in quite a bit of detail what's happened as Elvis has reported to shoot clam bake, leaving his beloved Circle G Ranch behind. Some of the struggles that he's been facing. When we last left him, he'd hit his head in the bathroom, looks like early in the morning, as he was getting ready to go to the first day of production, which would probably have been some kind of filming or rehearsal for the movie. But he couldn't make it because he was injured. Colonel called in a doctor. A couple of days later, the colonel called a meeting in Elvis's bedroom. There were a lot of people there. And that's what we're going to talk about when we come back from this song, which describes how it all started for Elvis, just like it's going to start for us today. Hi, Marion. Hi, Luann. Thank you both for coming. You're here just in time. Because it's going to start for us with the cross on the circle.
He saw the cross at dawn and said, "It's a good omen, and a dream again." At the break of dawn, through the window pane, he saw a cross in morning rain, white as grace, tall as prayer, calling him to build and share. Not a kingdom, not a throne, but a place of love alone, where laughter rides on horse's breath and peace outshines the fear of death. Come home to the circle and the sign, where the lake reflects the holy line. No one needs money, no one needs fame, just a handshake and a name. Come home where the cross stands tall. Come and share the love of all. Mobile homes and barbecue nights, trucks and trowels and porch light rides, the hand-picked heart to share the dream, a mythic village by the stream. This is more than land, it's grace, refuge carved in sacred space, a gift of love to friends and kin, protected from the world's loud din. Come home to the circle and the sign, where the lake reflects the holy line. No one needs money, no one needs fame, just a handshake and a name. Come
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. This refuge is a sacred space. Signed, sealed, remembered, Colonel Outlaws Spiritual Quest. So we're going to start today by reorienting ourselves into the timeline of the events that we're discussing. And yesterday, we talked about something new I had found, which was a favorite restaurant that Elvis had in Palm Springs. And he does own a house in Palm Springs, California at this time. So I'm assuming he's already been to this restaurant. And this was his favorite dish, frijole rancheros, which I believe translates to like beans and chips. But it's these ranchero beans, and they're put together with these other ingredients like you can see. And then I believe you eat them dipped out onto your nachos or your chips. And then Elvis always ordered an iced tea. And so this is one of the rituals of eating he would be engaging in, although perhaps not during this exact period. Although I do now have some information that at some point after this meeting, perhaps, maybe for this meeting, he'd already transferred to his house in Palm Springs. Seems kind of weird, though. Like, why would he do that? But I have some information on that. We're going to go through that today. But once he gets married, they're going to spend a lot more time in Palm Springs. And so I'm sure he will spend more time with this dish. Now we're back to the calendar. I have found a fan compilation of this period in a timeline. Like the fan did a bunch of research and put this together, this timeline. And they had some errors within the timeline as I went through, but they also have a bunch of entries that I've not yet found the source material for. And so I'm going to talk about what the fan has for us because I want to layer it in before we continue forward. The fan seems to have done a whole lot of research, and the stuff that I have matches up with the source materials I've found. So I'm assuming they have other source materials. They just haven't referenced what the material is. And so it's somewhat like when you read a book and the author doesn't put an exact footnote, or maybe they just have a sources page. You know that they got their material from somewhere. You pretty much trust the author because the parts you do know that you can fact check yourself, they're lining up. So that's what I think about these facts, but I can't even say they're facts. It's what I think about what's being put forward in this timeline. And so I just want to talk about it all together with, in the group here for a minute. And we'll layer this into our understanding of what's going on in the time period. But this account goes back to February 2nd, 1967. And so it's just before what we see on the calendar, which is for March 1967. But we know that probably the most important date in February, in terms of Circle G, is February 8th, because that's the day that Elvis wrote the $5,000 down payment check and that he signed the mortgage. And that is when he took possession of the Circle G. But we also know that he had talked to the owner of the Circle G some time before that. We don't know exactly when. Seems like it was 2 or 3 days, maybe 4. That would push it back at the furthest to February 4th. So up until that time, Elvis is living a dream of horses at Graceland itself. And on February 2nd, according to this source, Elvis paid $5,000 for an American-bred saddle horse. So I see no reason to doubt that. I'm assuming they pulled that from another book, or maybe they even saw a receipt. They don't say, but seems fairly reasonable. He was in a horse purchasing mood. And February 2nd fits perfectly into the account. On February 4th, Elvis wanted to enlarge the riding area behind Graceland. Now, we know that at some point, probably at the end of January, because Gary Pepper wrote about it and told fans, something had happened while he was riding between Red's horse and his horse. Like there'd been some kind of accident. And the reality is that Elvis tore some ligaments in his chest because of this accident. So he was hurt. And it's because they're riding these horses very fast, and they don't really have that much area in terms of a fast-moving horse. And so because of this lack of space, they're now literally running into each other. And now they're all in physical danger because they don't have enough space for all the horses and the people that want to ride the horses. And Jules says that $5,000 in 1967 is a lot of money. Yeah, it's roughly $50,000. So it is a lot of money. And I don't know which saddle horse this is because the source doesn't identify it. But I believe this is also part of what we've heard the man who sold Colonel Midnight, Vernon's horse, to Elvis. He said a $300 horse, people were asking $3,000 once they knew that Elvis wanted it. So it's very possible this is a $500 horse. And Elvis has paid $5,000 in order to acquire it. But on February 4th, they need more area. So this is a concern for Elvis on the 4th, more area. But he bulldozes several small buildings that are on the Graceland property. And we know of at least one, which is the house where Travis Smith and his family used to live on the grounds. And that house had been there since before Elvis bought the property. And Luann's saying that Elvis and Gary Pepper must have become good friends over the years. She's seen a lot of pics of Elvis and Gary. They were great friends from 1957 up until Elvis's passing away. Gary was actually on the payroll, and he'd get $100 a week. But he hadn't actually seen Elvis, it seems, in a couple, maybe 3 years. Which fits into this 1975, 1976 period where Elvis is having a lot of issues in the inner circle. He eventually gets rid of Red and Sonny and Dave. Linda leaves at the end of the year. In December, actually. So 75, moving into 76, I think these are years of change for Elvis. And then there has been massive change by 77. And Gary, by this point, lives in the house. So I've said often that Gary lives in the house that's next to Vernon on Dolan Street. And that is true. But I've since, and if you've been following the posts that I've been putting out, and you watched Ashley's Adventures that I linked to, that told the entire life story of Gary, much better than I ever will be able to, and by people who actually knew and cared for Gary, including his nurse. the woman who lived with him 24 hours a day and took care of him. They did not live next to Elvis at this point in time, 1967. That did not occur until later in the 1970s. I believe like 1973 or 74, based on the memories that they were stating within the interview. She might have even dated it exactly, and I just don't remember off the top of my head, but it's sometime around there. So they don't live there yet, but Sterling, Gary's father, works for Elvis as a gate guard during this time, and specifically at the Circle G at this moment, and he almost always works the midnight shift. So Gary is intimately linked to Elvis from 1957, when Elvis meets Gary and then hires Sterling. And then all the way until Elvis passes away. Now, by that point, Sterling is gone. He passed away on duty in the guard shack at Graceland. They found him out there one morning when they went to relieve him of duty. And I believe he was sitting with his head down on the desk. So that must have been very traumatic for Gary, as well as everyone else involved. And Luann agrees that $5,000 is a lot of cash for a horse, unless it's an ex-racer. And it might have been. Elvis was toying with this idea of breeding these horses, as well as the cattle. Hello, Jen. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And so we've heard this story of the bulldozing, but this source is placing a date on it as of February 4th. I've never seen a date placed on it yet. So that's very interesting to me. And we're kind of speculating that it's either the 4th, the 5th, or the 6th that Elvis sees the cross at the Circle G. They went out one of these nights and they bought Colonel Midnight for Vernon. And on the way back, at dawn, they saw the cross on the Circle G. So what dawn was that? Sounds like it's probably not the 4th. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to knock down these buildings. He would have known, hey, I got this other idea. On the 6th, this source says that Elvis bought a white buckskin horse and a quarter horse named Conchita's Gold, a case tractor, and 2 El Camino pickup trucks. To me, this makes it sound... Well, it makes my speculation now move more towards Elvis saw the cross the morning of the 5th. They find Jack, the man who owns the property. He tells Elvis to stay overnight and as long as he wants and use the place as his own, and they'll come to a deal later if Elvis still wants to do that. So I think Elvis probably spent the night of the 5th there. He wakes up the morning of the 6th. He says to Alan Fortas, "This is the best night's sleep I ever had." He says to Lamar Fike, "Good gosh, I'm back in Mississippi." And then he goes out and he buys a case tractor and 2 El Camino pickup trucks and another 2 horses because he's got the room for it all now and he's going to need it and he's very excited. So that makes a lot of sense to me. It would help us date when he actually met Jack in order to start this deal for Circle G. So then we move to February 14th, which is Valentine's Day of 1967. And the source indicates that Elvis bought a man's white gold horseshoe ring for $475 from Harry Levitch, which is Elvis's jeweler in Memphis at the time. So $475 would be about $4,700 today, maybe $4,500. So a fairly expensive piece of jewelry that looks like a horseshoe, which is wonderful to see because it really indicates that Elvis, he is into these horses. Like, they're all he can think about. He's buying El Camino pickup trucks, he's buying tractors, he's buying horses, and then he gets from the jeweler. Now, I don't know if he goes to the jeweler or he calls the jeweler and has him come out, but he's bought this nearly $5,000 horseshoe ring, probably for himself. And he also purchases a lady's horseshoe pin, also for $475. So another nearly $5,000 piece of jewelry. So on top of the other money that we know he spent almost $10,000 in today's money, nearly $1,000 in 1967 money, on two pieces of jewelry. But he also bought a special Valentine's charm. I'm assuming both of those pieces are for Priscilla. The horseshoe pin and the special Valentine's Day charm. And it probably costs a little bit as well. So I would guess at least $1,000 he spent this day on jewelry. And Linda says this is so interesting. Is that why Elvis wore rings that had horseshoe shapes? Well, I think we could trace the horseshoe-shaped rings back before he was dealing with the horses. Although they might all be linked to horse periods. Like, he was into horses for a while when he was dating June Wanico. Because there was a place to ride horses in Biloxi. It was like a country club. And he spent a lot of time on the horses there, at least for the amount of time he had to spend in Biloxi. He spent a lot of time. And of course, his first movie was a Western about horses. But I feel like he was, I want to say that he had a horseshoe ring around the time he knew Judy Spreckles. But I can't say that for sure. But that's an interesting line of thought. But at this moment in time, I think he's very much about horses. Ranch life. I think this is also mixed with his desire to be married. Not necessarily to Priscilla, but I believe he does want to be married. He does want to have a wife. He does want to have children. And he wants to have what I would think of as the dream of the house with the white picket fence. Now, in his dream, the house is bigger than Graceland and is on a 165 or 169 acre estate, which is the Circle G. But it's really just all of our dream to have the little private house with the white picket fence. And you're seeing it in all the things that he's buying and that he's now wearing, because he's wearing this jewelry. And we know at some point he gets a ring made that looks like his horse, the Rising Sun. It looks like Rising Sun's face. The beautiful ring, we've already seen it. And Linda says that she gets spending money on rings, but not so much on the horses. And Jen says she thinks I'm right, that he had a ring that was on the Wink Martindale show. It was definitely a pinky ring that Spreckles had bought him, and I feel like it was a horseshoe. But I can't remember for sure. But yeah, there was definitely a ring involved. I just can't remember if it was a horseshoe shape. And that ring, I think, is very special, and that there's a lot of history you could trace about Elvis, because there's a point where he stops wearing it, but he wore it consistently up to that point, which is another... He does wear pieces of jewelry consistently, but it's for very short periods of time, most of the time. And that might be because he's given it away so often, or he just has so much more access to new jewelry, and he's got these jeweler friends that are bringing him new pieces all the time. But in the beginning of his career, he get really attached to specific pieces, and that one that he got from Spreckles was very special to him. But then there's a point where it's not special to him, or it may not be that it's not special, but the meaning, the reason he wears it has, I don't know, dissipated. It's not there anymore. Not sure, but that'd be another fun one to take a much deeper look at. So the next day, the day after, on Valentine's Day, we know he also bought a ranchero, a black ranchero. It's the one we've seen that was in a museum for a while. So we know that happened. And we know earlier in the month, I believe on the 4th, which is the day they're saying he knocked down the buildings at Graceland, he also bought a ranchero. And that was before he saw the Circle G. So the rancheros and maybe the El Caminos, they'd already caught his eye. And he was thinking, I could use these pickup truck things now because I'm got all these horses. And now he's got an actual ranch. Because by the 14th, he's already bought this thing, and it's his. And he's making changes. And on the 15th, this source is indicating this is the day that Elvis starts buying house trailers. And that he initiates extensive repairs to the existing septic system, which is servicing the ranch house. But you've seen the map of Circle G if you've been following this with me. And if you haven't, make sure you head back into the archive and you watch some of the past episodes. And there's one where we take a really close look at a map. And you can see where I think the trailers were and where the house was. And they are all the way on opposite sides of the property. So there is absolutely no way that the trailers are hooked to the same septic system that the house is. However, we have heard that at least one trailer, which was supposedly the one that Elvis purchases for himself, or that he purchased for Alan Fortis and then chose to use for himself. Stories a little mixed on that. But some of those stories indicate that that trailer is up next to the ranch house. So that one probably would have been piped into the same septic system. So that might be the extensive repairs needed on the septic system. And we've heard the house is 100 years old. So it could be that that first night with those, we've heard reported over 20 couples inside the house, may have overtaxed the 2 bathrooms that are in the house, which is hilarious that it's a 2-bathroom, 1-bedroom house, but somehow they got 2 bathrooms. These may have become overloaded, and I'm sure we can all imagine what kind of problems that would have initiated here at the ranch house. So obviously Elvis would have had that fixed right away. But I got a feeling that there's a trailer there. If not just for himself, then maybe one, because that's also the area where they build a guard shack, and then a guard is in there all the time. Well, I doubt that guard shack has a bathroom. And the guards need a place to fix stuff to eat, and, you know, especially like Sterling, if he's going to be there all night, he's going to have to use the bathroom somewhere. So maybe he's got access back into the house, but if Alan's living there, I'm sure he doesn't appreciate that. So maybe there's a trailer up there that they use. I don't know. There was a reference in one piece of source material that, again, wasn't referencing a specific person or place that I could go look it up at, but it mentioned that there was a trailer somewhere that was used by the security personnel and other maintenance staff. So like the man who's there handling the cattle, things like that. So maybe they would have used this building if they needed to meet about anything, especially in bad weather, like a massive break room type of thing. If any of them needed to stay overnight to handle any of the animals, I could see a need for that trailer. And there's also a trailer that is mentioned in the Dr. Nick story that is before most of the other trailers would have arrived, according to most of the other sources. So it's possible that on February 15th, he did purchase a trailer. But we also know he had this dream about the mansion that he was going to build there, and he was going to give everybody a plot of land. Now, has that dream died between the 8th and the 15th? I don't know. So I feel more like a trailer or a couple of trailers for specific business reasons were bought. Maybe to house guys while Elvis thought about how they were really going to do this. I don't know. But that's what this source is indicating, February 15th. In February 17th, it says Elvis continued to buy pickup trucks for the guys, his relatives, and everyone who worked on the property. And on this day, he bought 1 Chevy Custom El Camino, 2 Dodges, 5 Fords, and 2 more house trailers. So that does kind of sound like he bought 1 on the 15th, and then he bought 2 more house trailers on the 17th, thinking, wow, this is cool. I'm going to get a couple of more of these, or I've thought of some more uses. The source says that on February 20th, which we can almost see on the calendar on screen, Elvis bought a red chestnut gelding and a Palomino mare, so he bought 2 more horses, and this is well into the Circle G period, so that makes total sense. I don't see anything to argue with there. On the next day, February 21st, Elvis was supposed to report to United Artists in Hollywood for the start of the production of Clambake. But Elvis, he didn't want to leave the ranch, and so he made arrangements before this day to record the soundtrack pieces that he needed to record in Nashville at RCA Studio B. Now, I also saw from a fan who loves the records and the songs, and, you know, as a real deep diver into those kind of things, very concerned with the quality, recording quality, especially the source recording quality of all of Elvis's songs. They feel that Studio B, and apparently this is accepted among this circle of Elvis fans. I don't know much about recording or music quality, stuff like that. These guys who collect the LPs and stuff, they are much more learned on this. And they say that RCA Studio B in Nashville is a far superior studio to Radio Recorders, which is the studio in Hollywood where Elvis records the pieces of the Clambake soundtrack he didn't finish. But he's also used it to record for other movies. And this community of Elvis fans feels that those recordings are inferior. Simply, no matter, even if the song was great, that the recording itself is inferior to what would have been recorded at Studio B in Nashville. So it's possible, you know, Elvis, being on top of things like that, would have known that. And he may have decided, I'm tired of recording Radio Recorders where I know it's going to be terrible, or it's more likely to be terrible, or it's just not going to be as good a quality as it could be if I recorded in Nashville. And that gives me a good reason to record in Nashville. It's probably something he said, right? And so they end up switching it over to Nashville. And that's the Colonel who does that. he's the one that's got to make all these arrangements. But the colonel also arranges for the cast insurance exam to take place at 5:30 p.m. at RCA Studio B, according to this source. Now that makes a massive amount of sense. One of the things that has to be done at the beginning of the production, they're going to have to get all this insurance paperwork done so that whoever's putting up all this money to actually film the production can feel that if something terrible were to happen to Elvis, like let's say he trips in the bathroom and falls and hits his head and he's unable to report to filming, that sounds far-fetched. But it turns out that that's exactly what happens this time around. That's why they get insurance. What if he had hurt himself to the point he could not have finished clam bake? Lots of money would be lost, at least from somebody who would put the money out. So they're protecting themselves with this insurance. It's part of every movie that Elvis has ever done that he's been the leading man on. This is the way that the business works. So there's probably a doctor involved with this exam. And the doctor, later on, when they're doing these exams for the tours, like the very last tour, right after Elvis passes away, Dr. Nick says, I just examined Elvis for a tour, and he was in perfect health. Well, what Dr. Nick means is there was insurance paperwork like this to do. He gave Elvis whatever exam doctors would normally give for those insurance exams. It's basically a physical. And it's a review of health history in most cases. And for Elvis, a relatively healthy young man, it's pretty cursory. Some doctor's going to show up and look at Elvis and listen to his heart, take his blood pressure. Basically check him through that he's going to be fine. And the insurance company is going to issue the insurance policy. So that's being done in Nashville, where it would normally be done in Hollywood. And this source indicates that Elvis arrived on a rented Learjet. Now we know that that Learjet may have been owned by the guy who owned and started and operated the Holiday Inns, who was a friend of Sam Phillips, who recorded Elvis's very first song, That's All Right. So it's possible that that's whose Learjet this is. So it's not really rented. And then he recorded until 6 a.m. that morning, and he did, there's, even this source is stating that Elvis had little interest in these movie songs. Now, we don't really know because we haven't heard from anybody that's really been at the recording session and reported on it yet. We haven't seen those kind of reports. But for the song You Don't Know Me, Elvis did 21 takes. Now, how do they determine, hey, we got to do another take? Well, almost in every case, it's Elvis that says we have to take another take. Elvis is producing these, and there are songs where others feel that they needed to take more takes, but Elvis decided no, he didn't want to move on with any more takes on that song. And a lot of those are songs that Elvis did not feel were worthy of any time being spent on them. But for this song, You Don't Know Me, which we looked at some of the lyrics in an earlier episode, he does 21 takes. That tells me he is invested in these songs. He is invested in the performance of Clam Bake. He's unhappy with Clam Bake. He's unhappy with the script. He's unhappy with the songs, but he is professionally invested. However, he is still not satisfied with the results of that song, and he ends up re-recording it later. So in 21 takes, he could not get it the way that he wanted it. And Luann says that Elvis's death came unexpected and was a sad time. And Linda says that she loves You Don't Know Me, and that Elvis had to have loved that song. And Marion agrees that she too loves the song. And Jen agrees it was a sad time when Elvis passed away. And Linda says that she finally finished watching Clam Bake and was surprised when she saw that You Don't Know Me was in the movie. It is sometimes surprising when you hear an Elvis song you like and then you realize it was a movie song. I've had that happen too. So the day after this, Elvis remains at the hotel, according to this source, in Nashville. So they don't fly back, according to this source, on this day. Now, everything that we've seen says Elvis immediately flies back, but it's not clear if it was that night or after the 3-day session or when. But this source is indicating he's in a hotel in Nashville, and he chooses not to leave the hotel to go to the recording studio. Now, we know that Red went and recorded a voiceover tracks for that, so that Elvis would have a guide to follow to match the instruments that were being recorded that night. And then the next day, on February 23rd, Elvis returns to the studio. And the source indicates this time he's wearing a complete cowboy outfit with the chaps. Now, we've heard that, but we heard it was the first night. But I also think that it seems crazy that he flew in from the ranch, but he waited to wear his chaps and stuff until the third day. Feels like he walked in the first day doing that, so I don't know. But this source is indicating he also did it on the third day, or he at least did it on the third day. And he recorded a bunch of overdubs of the stuff that Red had done, but they don't get fully done, and that's why he's got to complete it when they get to Hollywood. This source is indicating that Elvis flew back from Nashville on February 25th, which is the day before you can see on the screen when the calendar starts. Because this is a March calendar, but we can see Sunday, February 26th on it. So the day before, Elvis flies back from Nashville. I don't think that is correct. So I would love to see that source. I think it was 2 days before. I don't see why he would have waited to the 25th. But it says that this is early in the evening, so maybe they've seen the flight logs or something. And then he has the plane circle over his ranch. Well, we've heard that before too. But in the previous versions, it was all happening within a 1 or 3 day period. And we were even speculating maybe he'd flown back twice, but it doesn't really seem that way. It seems more like he was there for the 3 days, but then I have a hard time leaving him there till the 25th if his desire was to be back in Circle G, and since we have no entry for the 24th. Now, if he was doing something really important in Nashville on the 24th, oh, it makes perfect sense, right? But we got a gap there, so we don't know. And Gunn says that Elvis took his work with Clam Bake seriously, even if he didn't like it. Jen agrees. And Gunn says that 21 takes, I believe, proves it. He always did his best and what he promised to do. And Marion agrees that he always gave his best. So on the 26th, this is when Dr. Nick comes. Elvis had saddle sores. We've been through that story in detail. We know that the next day on the 27th, Dr. Nick travels to Graceland to give Elvis a copy of the letter that he's given the Colonel so that the Colonel can make the proper arrangements with the studios. We know the insurance company now because they're going to want to know we just insured this very healthy person and now he's not showing up for a medical reason. There's people to answer to because they've put forth money. That's what the colonel does. This source indicates that on the 28th, which is Tuesday, so Elvis is at the Circle G from the 26th through the 4th. I'm assuming he stays at the Circle G, but he may be traveling back to Graceland every night and sleeping in his bed there and then getting up the next morning and coming back to the Circle G. Don't know what the sleeping accommodations are. Obviously, he'd have them if he wants them there at the ranch, but it seemed like after that first night, they felt like the accommodations there weren't going to be suitable for overnight stays at this moment. But he's definitely playing hard on the ranch between the 26th through the 4th. And on Tuesday, the 28th, this source is saying that the colonel communicated a warning to Marty Lacker. Now, we've heard before that Marty Lacker received a letter. And I don't have that date right in front of me. I'm going to have to match that up for the next one. But I think this is talking about the same letter. This source doesn't indicate letter, but it gives us specific quotes. And I don't think they're quoting what the colonel said. I think they're quoting what the colonel wrote. So I think these are quotes from that letter. But again, I cannot verify that. So I just want you to be aware of that. But this source attributes these statements to the colonel. The first one is, we have spent hundreds of dollars in at least 3 weeks on telephone calls and have accrued practically no information whatsoever, and this must stop. Well, then the source notes, Colonel wrote this. So I believe this is from that letter. We have spent hundreds of dollars in at least 3 weeks on telephone calls and have accrued practically no information whatsoever, and this must stop. The colonel is indicating that he has called. The source is indicating that he's not able to get a hold of Elvis. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that he has some form of regular communications with Marty. And this source is indicating that one of Marty's responsibilities was to keep the lines of communication open, which I believe means Marty was to answer the phone when the colonel calls. Whatever the colonel's being told is not what's happening in real life because it's not matching up. And we don't know exactly what information the colonel's talking about, but we do know that Marty's had some issues, perhaps, with all of the paperwork for the massive number of automobiles, trucks, and such that have been bought. And it's not matching up all the paperwork in the office, and they're not blaming it on Marty in any of the sources. But Marty's indicated he may have made some errors. Thinks he got them all right. The office has indicated there's definitely errors, but they don't know where they are. They don't blame anyone or mention where they originate, but that there's a lot of confusion. And we know that the colonel had sent this letter, and now he's saying it looks like he's been trying to get involved in fixing things, but he's getting bad information. And he's also written that everything's got to come soon, quote, come to a head, where we will have some proper assignment, whether it be you or someone else, where we have a definite, immediate contact at all times. So here the colonel's telling Marty, someone's supposed to be answering the phone. I'm calling. No one's answering the phone. And when I am getting the phone answered, whatever's being told to me is not correct. And if we need to get somebody else to answer the phone, we can do that. That the colonel's not married to Marty in any way, and he'd be just as fine talking to somebody else. This is not exactly the way that Guralnick indicated it. He indicated that the letter demoted Marty. This seems more like a threat to demote Marty. And then we know in the meeting we've been looking at, Marty gets demoted. So now it kind of lines up a little better. But again, we haven't seen the whole letter, so we don't know. And Luann is asking, is the name Colonel American saying for a name? I haven't heard of a name Colonel before until Tom Parker became known. Colonel is a title. It's typically a military title, but in America, the states, the governor of each state, most usually the southern states really like to do this, especially around the time and after of the Civil War, but it continues right up to today. The governor can name specific people as a colonel. It's an honor. It's an honorary title, but as an honorary title, all titles are honorary, truthfully, but as an honorary title, you're allowed to use this the same way that like a pastor might have reverend as an honorific. If that's an honorary title, they've earned the right to use it. The right to use the colonel title is granted, but typically you've done something very, like a big favor for the governor. The colonel was given a governorship by two different governors of two different states. So the colonel did favors that these two governors really appreciated, and we don't know exactly what they are. But one of them was the governor of Mississippi. He'd known the colonel for a long time. Now, some people will say that because the title was granted this way, that you're not supposed to be using it like that. But if you know Kentucky Fried Chicken and you know Colonel Sanders, well, he was a Kentucky colonel. A governor of Kentucky had granted him the title colonel, and he used it. So it's not unknown for people to use the title colonel. And the Tom latched onto it, and he always used it. And Gunn says that she didn't know it was Parker's job to check the finances. And I don't know that's what Parker's doing here. Parker has to he has to arrange all of the logistics for everything. So let's say they're all going to be coming out to Hollywood to film a movie like Clambake. Well, somebody has to set up the planes, because at this point, Elvis doesn't own any planes. So somebody has to buy all the tickets or rent the plane or whatever that is. Much like the case of the Learjet. I mean, we had seen some information that Elvis had contacted a neighbor who owned Holiday Inn, and that's how he got the jet. Most likely, the colonel made all of those contacts. It's rare that Elvis would do anything like that. So it's not really so much about the finances as it is we make money by everything being set up properly to be done at specific times. So like the recording session, you're getting a lot of people together that you're paying a lot of money. So you really need to know when Elvis is going to be available. And if Marty's not answering the phone, you don't know when he'll be available. And Gunn says that he doesn't need to worry about anything as long as he gets his 50%. Well, that's what he's most worried about. He wants to see those numbers so he can get the 50%. And it's also possible, remember this, that Vernon might be calling Parker and saying, hey, I don't know this or that, and Parker needs information from Elvis's people about it. And now we're in a whole kerfuffle about who knows what and who's, there's communication issues where there shouldn't be any, and there never have been. And that's not necessarily being caused by Elvis. That could be caused by a person who's abusing drugs, as we know that he is. And we know that this letter, according to Peter, indicated that the colonel knew that Marty had a drug abuse problem, and that could be leading to this situation. So we don't know. Be great if we get the whole letter, huh? And Linda saying she didn't know that Colonel Sanders was a Kentucky colonel, and that she used to love eating at KFC and she had to stop. Well, hopefully you didn't have to stop because he was a colonel. But he did. Colonel Sanders was an amazing individual. He started that all as a gas station, and then he invented the recipe for the KFC. But he did not franchise out like a McDonald's. He sold the recipe and the method to all kinds of different restaurants. And then he would come and personally set that up and train people on how to make this chicken. And then he traveled around and he realized they weren't making the chicken right. And that led to the franchising and stuff. But while he was doing that, he became very famous and rich, and Kentucky loved him, and that's why they gave him the title colonel. And interestingly, he was already over 50 years old when he did this, and he used to curse like a sailor. Like every other word was a cuss word. And once he became a colonel, and he had this money, which he'd never had before in his life, he pledged himself to God and said that was the day he stopped cursing. That he pledged himself to God and said that he would do whatever God wanted him to do. That he felt that he had been blessed and he was already following this path, and now he gave it to himself to it fully, and that he never had an urge to ever say another curse word. So I always found that to be a special story about Colonel Sanders, the KFC guy. But that's not exactly Elvis. And we have not we're not going to get to, the third law that the Colonel lays down. I've teased you guys all again because we spent too much time on going through these other portions, but I think they're important. I think now that we know these pieces, it helps us to line everything up. And it's going to mean that much more to us when we see the third thing that the Colonel does. But it was given away in the title. He's going to outlaw spiritual quests. He's had enough. And Luann says that it sounds to me as if Tom didn't want to get a secretary, and he probably wanted to run things his own way. Well, that's very interesting, Luann, because he did have a secretary, and I can tell you a lot about her. Her name was Trudy. And she's a very interesting character with a lot of stories of her own. There's actually a book that her son wrote about her. I think her name is Forrester. Trudy Forrester, I want to say is her last name. But I have a bunch of letters that Trudy wrote. And one time she got herself in a little trouble by trying to pitch a song to Elvis. So she's got a lot of great stories connected to her. And I've thought about doing a series that's all about her letters. That's kind of what his book is. I've never read it, but or maybe it's not. Maybe his book I've never seen it, but I happen to have found a bunch of Trudy's letters, and I think it would be great fun to read through them. And they're from an earlier period, a lot of them, but they do stretch through this period, but there are a lot of them from the earlier period of Elvis's career. So they're like a look into what was going on behind the scenes. And Linda says that she loves that KFC chicken, and she stopped because she didn't think it was good for her, but it sure was yummy. And then Gunn says that a manager shouldn't be bothered with how many cars or horses Elvis bought. Should he You're absolutely right. He shouldn't be bothered with anything Elvis is doing on a personal basis with his money. And Gunn says that she could eat KFC every day. And now you know something new about the Colonel while you're eating that next piece. And Luann says that she had KFC for dinner the other night. And now you can tell people a new story about the Colonel. And I'm gonna, and Marianne says, didn't Parker marry his secretary? Different secretary, Marianne. And she was not his secretary, she was his executive assistant. So she didn't actually have the title secretary. The other one did. Trudy, I believe, had the title secretary. But the other lady, she actually started out employed by, I can't remember if it was the studio or the hotel. I think it was the hotel, the International Hotel, yeah. And she eventually took employment with Colonel. And then Colonel's wife was extremely sick. And Colonel took care of her right to the very last moment. And then he did end up marrying this assistant, this executive assistant that he had. And she's the one that you see in like different specials where they're interviewing the Colonel's wife. But I'm going to send you guys all out of here with another song. And this one will be, I like this one a lot. So let's do this one again. Threads and Dreams, all about Circle G. And when we come back for the next episode, hopefully we'll finish with the meeting in the bedroom. And thank you guys all so much for coming. And you all keep on taking care of business.
He wore a yellow shirt, black pants in the sun, rode horses through silence, then golf carts for fun. A ranch just 10 miles from the mansion's bright gate, where the myth met the morning and time learned to wait. George fixed the brickwork, the pipes in the ground, lit VP on shirt where no spotlight was found. Donna kept diaries, snapshots ahead of a father who labored, of a myth made by men. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place to be still when the world spun around. In the hands of the quiet, in the stitch of a scene, he carried the weight of a half-finished dream. The holster was worn, leather was cracked, BP etched in thread, no glory attached. Mike shaped the saddle, the belt and the load, so Elvis could ride through a myth he adored. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place singing still, that courage spun out. In the hang out the fight, the mistakes on the seat, we drained the weight of the hurts and his teeth. Slow start.